And again, really, really glad that you're here and a chance to be a part of part 3 of this series, Keeping It Together. Now, just to kind of keep us together, let me kind of get us all on the same diving board this morning and allow us to kind of jump into the deep end together a little bit by just simply going back and playing back, okay, where are we in this thing? As we talk about this tension in which we live of how do we keep family together when it feels like everything is pulling it apart, what are the 4 kind of pillars we've been looking at in this particular series? And we said next week we're going to land where most of us wish we could start, and that is with solve conflict. That's where we wish we could start, right? In fact, you might have finally drugged somebody here with you today because you're mad at them, all right? And you're like, hey, they're talking about relationships, we're going to solve our conflict. And conflict's normal, it happens. You're not a great family because you have no conflict. You have a chance to be a great family when you acknowledge your conflict. It's just part of it. It happens. The Allen 4, there's only 4 of us under our roof, and we had conflict this week. It just doesn't take much. It happens. And so we'll talk about that a little bit next week. Today we're going to spend some time just talking about how we can solve calendar. And in our culture, in our world where things are very quick and it's very fast and there's a lot pulling at us, there's actually a lot we can solve if we can solve calendar first. There's actually a lot of, quite honestly, conflict that we may just take right off the table. I mean, if you just even pause before we get very far into this thing today and thought, what percentage of conflict, of tension, in whatever you call family right now, whether it's a husband and wife relationship or a parenting or a single parenting or a dating or an engagement or a university dorm, whatever your context of family is right now, just think how much is caused by pace and calendar and chaos and what feels like chaos. We'll talk about that some today, and it might actually help mitigate some of the conflict before we actually get to the week on conflict. In order to help us do that, last week we talked about this idea of what does it look like to build sacred? What does it look like to establish the things that are most meaningful to us, the non-negotiables in our family? And had a lot of fun, Erica, my wife, and I getting a chance just to share some of that together last week and just talking about, okay, if push comes to shove, what are the things we're not budging on? Not what are the things that we have perfect, but what are the things that we're determined are important enough that we're always going to be working on them. We're always going to be aware of where they are and how we're doing there. It's just the sacred things, these things that we hold most dear, the irreducible minimums, the non-negotiables. Now, what's interesting, though, is that sacred is actually built by whatever we determine to build solid around. Build solid is first. See, here's the thing. Every relationship we have, including every family relationship, it is built on something. We've deliberately chosen that something, or it's been handed to us, and we've just subconsciously or almost unintentionally grabbed a hold of it. But every relationship we have is built on something or someone. The invitation of Jesus is to say, hey, could you let me be the center? Could you be a Jesus-centered family? Because when I'm the center, I can hold all things together. As long as I serve in a consulting role or an occasional, advice-giving role, then I'm not really able to hold all things together. In this letter we've been looking at called Colossians, that Jesus is actually described as the one who holds all things together. And when we allow him to be the center of our lives and then of our families, we actually experience that benefit. You see, we had an honest conversation on week 1 that it's very easy in our culture, in this part of the world and in this part of our country, it's very easy to call yourself a Christian family and not resemble anything that is a Jesus-centered family. It's very easy to call yourself a Christian family, do some nice things, even show up in some religious circles, and not be a Jesus-centered family. The invitation of Jesus is, hey, would you let me be the center? Would you let me kind of set the course and lead the way? Would you let me be the strength? Let me be the endurance? Would you let me be the patience? Would you let the weight of your family kind of rest on me so it doesn't have to rest on you? Some of you, following week 1, quite honestly, took steps that I'm not sure I've seen more courageous steps in Jesus following than I got to see and hear about in some of the conversations after no matter what we've ever talked about, some of the moves that people made in order to go from kind of Jesus as part of the circle to Jesus-centered were unbelievably bold and courageous and risky and daring. And it's still overwhelming to me. But here's the thing we got to understand in that, right? Here's the last pause for some of us in that. When we talk about build solid, what we've got to understand is that the reason we have to think about it, the reason it's even an issue on the table, is because we all bring junk to the table. We all bring some brokenness, some dysfunction to the table. In fact, just look around the room for a minute, not necessarily at the person sitting next to you. Look around the room. Just look around. You can't keep looking at me and look around the room, okay? Look around the room a little bit. Look. You see all them people? They all got stuff. They all got stuff. The one that you passed in the lobby that you think is most perfect, you want to know their secret? They got stuff. We all got stuff. So here's the deal. When we're talking about building solid, what we got to understand is no guilt, no shame. Only compassion, love with the potential of transformation. That's it. And sometimes the thing that keeps us from making a move to build solid is before we ever build solid, we look at the idea of Jesus and the person of Jesus, and we just absorb all this guilt and shame and say, that could never be me. Which is 100% true without Jesus. And Jesus makes this possible. He says, no, come build solid on me. Build solid on me. And then when you do, that influence sacred, and his values start to become our values, and his desires start to become our desires. He literally just begins to transform our lives by the presence of his Spirit in us. And then what's sacred, and it was fun to hear conversations about people talking about sacred and families talking about sacred this week as well. And that sacred then begins to shape how we think about calendar and how we navigate calendar in a world where it feels like there's more coming at us than there is space on the calendar. So let's talk about it a little bit. We're going to go back to the same letter we've been in the last couple weeks, in Colossians in the New Testament of the Bible, Colossians chapter 3. If you grabbed a Blue Worship Center Bible, we're going to be on page 806. If that's helpful for you or not, you can go on a phone or whatever Bible you brought with you today. And we're reading a letter that's almost a couple thousand years old now, but it's got all these life-giving, lasting principles in it. And it's written by a guy named Paul, empowered by the Spirit, to write to people who, like us, are saying, okay, what does it look like to build solid with Jesus as the center? But at the same time, there's so many thoughts and so many opportunities and so much busyness being thrown at them that it's really threatening to pull them apart at the seams as followers of Jesus and as families and as a community. It's literally threatening to just unravel them. And so Paul's writing in that, trying to say, no, wait. You really can build solid. Jesus can hold it all together. You really can build sacred and choose these compelling values that become the irreducible minimums of your family. And when we do that, then there are some ways to solve calendar. So let's see it. Colossians chapter 3, we're going to jump in right at the beginning and just read a couple of verses that are going to serve as a little bit of a springboard for us this morning. This is what he says. Since you've understood that Jesus can hold all things together and can be the center, since then, you have been raised with Christ. Now, hold on just a second. You see, here's the thing. We can just kind of buzz by that, but we got to catch some context. We got to remember a few things. He's saying, since you've been raised with Christ, so he's writing, assuming the people reading the letter have made a very intentional decision to give their lives to Jesus, to yield the leadership of their life into the hands of Jesus, to respond to his grace and his forgiveness and his relationship and his leadership. And what he says is when you do that, you've been raised with him. You die to yourself as leader and you become new in Jesus. Jesus literally makes you new. And he uses this raised language because the picture of the New Testament of the Bible is us being made one with Jesus, united with him in his death and in his resurrection. And that's why we love baptism. That's why we love this baptism, this symbol that God gives us to say, look, when people are baptized and they're immersed down into the water, it's this reminder that, oh yeah, when we choose to follow Jesus and receive his grace and his forgiveness and his leadership, when we choose to follow Jesus, we literally become buried with him, united with him in his death. But then, man, we're also united with him in his resurrection. Our spirit literally comes to life right now. And so God, knowing we would need reminders and visuals, he gives us things like baptism. He says, man, celebrate that like crazy. Let that be a public marker of who you are. And so Paul's writing that, and these people, they've got some context of that. Oh, yeah. When we gave our lives to Jesus, something changed in us. We were raised with him. We were united with him. And he goes on to say this. Now, since you've got that in mind, since you were raised with Christ, set your hearts on things above. Well, that's where Jesus is seated at the right hand of God. And then he says it again, set your minds, set your heart, your desires, your emotions, and set your minds, your thinking on things above. not on earthly, quick, fleeting, common things. For here it is again, for you died to all that stuff when your life is now hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you're going to get to appear with him in glory. So here's what Paul's starting to get to. He's starting to say, look, you're still living on this earth, and you still live in the economy of time. Time is like money. There's a limited amount of it, and it's an economy that we steward. We intentionally or unintentionally invest it in whatever is occupying our time. And Paul's saying, hey, look, if we really, really want to see time, if we really want to solve calendar, let's think about things that are eternal. Let's think about things beyond maybe this 70 or 80 years of our life, or even the 70 or 80 years of our kids. Let's think beyond temporary dreams. Let's think about things that last. And inside of that, there's some calendar lessons we can learn. And the first one is very simply this: that whatever our view is of Jesus and eternity, it absolutely determines our view and use of time. However we view Jesus and however we view eternity, however we view life everlasting and Jesus' connection to that, it absolutely determines how we use and how we see and understand time on this earth. You see, if we see Jesus is not everlasting and we see life as temporary, then the natural result is we'll invest only in temporary things. They might be really good things. But if we begin to see that, okay, wait a second, this Jesus who raised us with him is eternal, is everlasting, and we set our minds on that, then that begins to change how we view time. The thing that seems pressing today does not necessarily seem pressing for the sake of eternity. The thing that causes me stress today does not necessarily need to cause me stress against the backdrop of eternity. I like how the psalmist wrote it. He says this in Psalm 90, verse 12. This is a real sobering passage of the scripture, okay? Teach us to realize the brevity of life. That's encouraging. Isn't it great to just be reminded on occasion that your life isn't very long? Your physical life in this body on this earth isn't that long. Hey, can we just agree together? If we pull back for one notch, we understand it's brief. It's quick. It's not guaranteed. We're working like crazy to expand the years people can live, and yet it's still brief. Okay? And when we begin to understand that, he says, then we begin to live skillfully. When we understand that life is short, we begin to live skillfully. We begin to navigate it differently. We begin to make different decisions about our time. Passions that are different occupy our time. So yeah, man, think long. James, the brother of Jesus, he said it a different way. He said, your life's just a mist. It's here today, it's gone tomorrow. You know how quick a mist is? You know those like little spray bottles, you spray the little water, that was your life. That's quick, yes? Look, even if you're 20 and feel invincible, which we all did at 20, you kind of understand that death is batting 1,000. Ask who brought you if you don't understand, okay? Right, and that's what Paul's trying to get to in Colossians 3. Part of what he's trying to say is, look. Let's die to temporary self-living and let's live to eternal life. Let's live to things that are eternal. Let's die to the pressure and the constraints of the temporary and let's live for what's eternal. Let's live for what lasts. Let's set our minds and our hearts and our passions. Let's be compelled about things that last. And there's something in us that draws us to that, right? There's a little thing in us, and God said that he put eternity in our hearts, and we kind of understand that, right? Same guy, Paul, writing a little bit later to a group of people in a place called Corinth, he said it this way in chapter 4. He said, hey, you all kind of understand, right, that the body is wasting away, right? It just is. No matter what we do, it is dying. But there's an opportunity for us to live like our spirit is being renewed day by day. And so that when this physical life dies, our spirit is alive and remains alive with God forever. Our spirit is going to live somewhere forever, with God or apart from God. And Paul's kind of tossing this reminder on the table. Look, you kind of know that, right? Your body's wearing down. When you're 20, you don't heal as fast as you did when you were 8. When you're 40, you don't heal as fast as you did when you were 20. And I'm not going any further than that because I'm starting to get personal, but right? We understand it. There's this thing in us. We know this. We're drawn to the long haul. We're drawn to the long haul. And here's what's true. Thinking about eternity is not overlooking today. Thinking about eternity places a whole different value on today. It says, man, wait, if you think about things that are above, and it'll change how you want to use time. And that's so important because here's the tension we all live with, right? There's a lot of really good things clamoring for our time. Part of the reason we can feel like we're being pulled apart is the number of things that feel like they want our time or they want calendar space or that just naturally seem to somehow get calendar space. Even really, really good things. In fact, Paul kind of starts to list some down in verse 15. You can drop down a little bit if you want. You can follow along on the screen. But let's just look at some of the things that Paul talks about later. And all of these are an investment of time. He says this in verse 16, let the message of Christ, the scriptures, and the person and the story of Jesus, let that dwell in you richly. Look, in order for it to get in order for the story of Jesus to get in, we think about it. We point time towards it. We point energy towards it. The message of Jesus doesn't sink into the deepest parts of our heart through osmosis. It might occasionally work for a history test. It never works with this. Okay? He says, let it dwell in you richly. As you teach and admonish one another. Here, community, we do it together. Well, that takes time, right? Following Jesus, even living life in any capacity with people, it takes time. Admonish one another, push one another, encourage one another with all this wisdom through psalms and hymns and songs. And that's why we say often, for 11 years I beat this drum. When you show up on a Sunday morning, when we gather here, when the church gathers in this particular building, and you sing and you engage, God's using that to encourage people around you. You may think it's awful. He makes it a gift to the people around you every single time. I should know I'm among the ones who sound awful, right? But it's true, but it takes time. You've invested time to be here. We've invested time in order to be this. Sing with gratitude in your hearts. He goes on. He's going to just start unpacking examples from life. Whatever you do, wherever you go, wherever you invest your time, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name or the character of the Lord Jesus and give thanks to him through God our Father. And then he's going to use a marriage example. I love it. Wives, submit to your husbands. This is fitting to the Lord. Husbands, love your wives and don't be harsh with them. Now hold on for a second. He paints another picture of this in a letter called Ephesians, where he says, hey, yeah, wives, submit to your husbands, fatherly, but he says, husbands, don't think you're getting off scot-free on that. You actually have the bigger challenge. Why don't you go ahead and love your wife like Christ loved the church, which means why don't you go ahead and die for your spouse? Go ahead and lay down your life and your desires and go ahead and lay down everything that you've got. Go ahead and lay down your dream on occasion for her dream. What he's really saying is, hey, husbands and wives, why don't you just live life trying to outserve one another? Go ahead and live life trying to outserve one another. If you're dating somebody that won't serve you or won't receive your service, it's another reason to run. I think I've dropped in a reason to run every week. Marriage really can't be good. Sorry, okay? Got to watch that balance somehow. Right? But seriously, but it's built on that. Built on that. It's like, okay, so he's talking about marriage. And that takes time. It takes time to learn how to reconcile together, to learn how to serve one another, to learn how to serve in a way that your spouse actually hears, not the way you want them to hear. There's this time in that. He goes on a little bit further. Verse 20 is one of my favorite right now. Now, great children, obey your parents and everything, for this pleases the Lord. If you're a parent and your kid's not in the room, take a picture. Hurry, okay? My kids were in first hour. I read it twice and then let it sit there for a bit, right? Obey your parents. Listen, it takes time. Unfortunately, our kids are not born with a natural bent towards obedience. They learn to obey, right? We learn this follow. We learn this take guidance. We learn this take counsel thing, right? That takes time. Fathers, moms, parents, don't embitter your children. Well, it takes time to learn how to love your kid and how to communicate the right way and how they hear. And if you have different kids, how they hear differently and what their languages are, right? It takes time. Paul's listing these things that are remarkably important to our lives. He says it takes time. He keeps going. He's just going to keep rolling out the life examples. Slaves, and let's take context here. Just put employees in here. Think about work for a minute. Employees, obey your earthly master. Do what your boss has asked you to do and everything. And do it not only when their eye is on you to curry their favor, but with sincerity of heart and reverence for the Lord. When you work, man, work like you're working for Jesus, not just this boss. Whatever you do, work it out with all your heart. You don't have a merely human boss. When we follow Jesus, he's our Lord and he's Lord of our work. We work in a way that honors him and includes him, but that takes time. Verse 24 keeps going. You know that when you do that, there is a reward. There is something that comes back your way. There's good in that. It's the Lord Christ you're serving. Verse 25, anyone who does wrong, anyone who tries to live differently, this is the real reap what you sow. I mean, this is over and over in the story of God. He's inviting us to make life-giving decisions and saying there's good in that when we do. Let's keep going. Let's keep reading what comes next. Then he talks to the bosses. Hey, bosses, leaders, owners, managers, provide for your employees what is right and what is fair. Treat them well. And that takes some time. It takes time to understand what that is and how you can treat them well and how you can encourage them. It takes time to keep up with what is the legal expectation of treating people fair. That takes time. It's energy in that. But you want to do that because you also have a leader in heaven. You also have a master in heaven that you love, that he is gracious to you and kind and compassionate. So the natural result of a Jesus-centered life is that starts leaking out of our lives into the people around us. Paul's talking about things that matter. And then if you jump ahead to chapter 4, verse 2, devote yourselves to prayer. Well, that sounds cool. I wish I could pray. I wish I could pray. Well, that takes time, right? He actually says pray without ceasing later in a different letter. Let all your time be full of this ongoing conversation with God. You see, there's a lot in that, and you can hear that's a lot good, and we could say all of that is sacred, and maybe all of that's treasured, and maybe there's very specific things for you that your family talked about this week, and you said, yeah, that's sacred to us. We pray together this way, and that's sacred to us, or whatever that is. But there's a lot that's good, and yet calendar still seems chaotic. It still seems almost sometimes oppressive and weighty. It seems to create so much tension. So how do we really navigate it? How could we pull some of the tension out of this thing of calendar? It's one thing to see time the way Jesus sees it and see eternity. But the second reality is if we're going to determine that we're going to build solid on Jesus and we're going to let him shape sacred, then when it comes to calendar, what we've got to come to grips with is if it's not in our calendar, then it's not sacred. If it's not in our calendar, it's not sacred. Part of our internal tension in life is we're saying a lot of things are sacred, and they're nowhere on our calendar or in our life. We're saying a lot, this is valuable to me, and this means a lot to me, but it enters life nowhere because it enters calendar nowhere. If it's not on the calendar, it's not sacred. We're living in a contradiction here. And there's no condemnation in that. There's permission to kind of align it. There's the invitation to align this. What's also true is the other side, that in large portions, whatever is on your calendar is sacred, whether you want it to be or not. It doesn't necessarily matter who put it there. Did you put it there? Did somebody else put it there? Did just the normal flow of culture put it there? Did somebody tell you had to do that? Were there enough people putting their kids in that you thought you had to put your kids in that? Who decided you had to run at that pace? Who decided how much had to go on, right? Doesn't matter who put it there. Whatever is occupying the dominant amount of our calendar, it is sacred whether we want it to be or not. You say, yeah, but how do we live in a way that the busy doesn't crowd out the important? That the busy doesn't crowd out the sacred? How do we live in that way? About 30 years ago, a guy named Stephen Covey wrote a phenomenal book about a lot of life. And in it, he used an analogy about time. And I had to read this book in college, and I'm glad I did. When I read it in college, there was a part of this book, this analogy that Stephen Covey used that literally changed the foundation of my brain and how I view time. It literally changed the way I view time and use time and think about time. And over the years, I've seen people actually play out this analogy. And every time, I find myself just challenged by it again. I think, oh my word, yes, that's it. And sometimes it's encouraging, and other times it's this invitation to recalibrate a little bit. Got to change the oil on the calendar and how we're using time. And what I want to do this morning is I just want to show you this analogy. If you've never seen it, I'm convinced it will kind of shape our thinking around this. If you've seen it before, I'm convinced, much like it's been for me, it'll just be challenging again to you, maybe even today. See, here's the thing. We all have the same amount of time. Okay? The person next to you doesn't have any more hours in the day. If they're getting more done or getting more sleep, it's just because they're choosing to use the time differently. We all have 24 hours a day. We all have 7 days a week. We all have 12 months a year. We have the same amount of time when we leave here that we'll all have the same amount of time left in the day. Monday, we're all going to have the same 24 hours. It is a limited commodity. And it seems to be that there are an unlimited number of things vying for it. It's an unlimited number of things vying for space on the calendar and to occupy some of this time. I mean, don't you sometimes feel like it'd be better if you just never had to sleep? Right, man, it'd be great. Think of all I could get done, right? Look, if we were awake all 24 hours, I'm convinced there'd be 25 hours of things nipping at our heels, wanting more of that time. Like, we all have the same amount. And so there are some ways we can tackle this. We can pour in the sand, and let's just call it the sand. I mean, it's just the little things of life. It's nothing bad. It's not evil. We're not talking about sin things here. We're talking about just things that occupy our time. They creep in. It's social media. It's watching the show on Netflix. It's kind of doing those simple things. There's nothing bad in them. They're kind of fun. They just get in there. They're just little things we got to do. It's rearranging things. Like it's this constant rearranging of clutter and moving. It just takes time, and you get done and it looks better, but then a day later you still have clutter, right? And it just starts to take this time, and it just fills in. It's part of life. Again, there's nothing bad in it. We all have it. We all have it. It's just part of it. Okay? Then there's these other things in life where they're more than just those little grains of sand. These are things that have some value. There are some things we really do have to get done. If we don't get them done, eventually there's a consequence. We really do have to run that errand. We've got to pick that thing up. We really do have to return that library book. We really do have to pay that fine. We really do have to mow the grass. Dear God, do you feel my pain? Even right there, just even I'm saying it. But it is part of life, right? I mean, for some of you, that's a joy. But right, there's all these things that just take time. It's the homework. It's the extra homework. It's the thing that we feel like somebody wants us to get done. It's that little bit of extra cleaning. They've got to get done. And if they don't, we kind of feel like, oh, man, there was a consequence to that, right? We just didn't quite get it all. Just didn't quite get it all done. We all have them. There's nothing bad in either jar. But then we've got these other things that these are the things they're most valuable to us. They're most sacred. They're the things that we would say, if push came to shove, if we could start with a blank slate, we'd say, these are the things that matter most to me. Yeah, I want to follow Jesus. I want him to be the center of my life. I want to engage with him some, which means I really do. I want to read the scripture some. I want to be around Jesus and engage in that. I want to gather with his people. And oh man, I love the idea, of kind of being around people and laughing and I want to invest in relationships and meaningful relationships, and that's real. And man, you know what? I work and I've got to work. That's part of life. And I might even get to love my job. And so I want to go and I want to do my best. And I want Jesus even to go to work with me. I want him to be a part of that with me. And I've got some bills to pay. That's a real responsibility. I want to be faithful in that. I want to be financially faithful. I need to exercise. I really do want to value my health. It's important to me. And so I'm going to make some good decisions there. And I'm going to do that. And they're just all these things. I want to have a good marriage. And so I'm going to build on that. And man, I really do love my kids. And so just investing in them and being with them, that matters so much to me. I want to make sure I do that. And we have all of these things that are so important. They're these really big rocks that take up all of this space. But the challenge becomes they eventually don't all fit. You feel that pressure with me a little bit? There are these things in our life that we say, man, this is important to me. But it's not getting in there anywhere. It's not sticking. There just isn't enough room. Yeah, man, I want to serve, and that sounds cool, and I want to get to know some people, but man, I can't seem to get all of that in there. Now, come on, this is a tension for us. Look, just a moment of silence. You don't have to raise your hand or nod your head or anything, but look, listen. How many of you in your life and in your family, that just feels like your calendar a little bit? There's a whole bunch of stuff you want to get in there, and it just isn't fitting. It just isn't fitting. And maybe it feels like a season, but maybe it feels like a recurring season. Just keeps coming. Just what if there's a different way? What if we flipped the script a little bit, and what if we said, hey, you know what? The first thing I'm going to put in, my life is centered on Jesus. He's going first, and I'm going to invite him into my whole life by putting him into my life first. I want him to influence everything, so I'm going first. And yeah, you know what? I want to be with my family, and I want to invest in some time with that, and I really do want to go to work. I'm going to take Jesus to work with me because I led with him first. I want to spend time with my kids, and I want to try. I'm going to learn. I'm not a great parent, not a perfect parent, but boy, I sure am going to be an engaged parent, whatever that means. And you know what? I I even want to figure out how it is I can be a good in-law. Right? I'm going to do that one too. That's going in. I value that because I value my kids or whoever that is. I'm going to make sure that happens, right? I'm going to put it in. I'm going to make sure I am going to take care of my health. I'm going to steward this body that I have. And I know it's decaying. Paul told me it's honest, but I'm going to steward the temple well that I have right now. I'm going to put my finances in order. I'm going to be able to have time to actually think about my finances. And you know what? I just love my family enough. We're going to make sure we have fun together. We're going to schedule it. We're going to put some fun times in the calendar and those kind of things. And you know what? As a husband and wife, we're going to schedule some time where it's just the two of us. And it's not our kids. Our kids aren't God, they're a gift. And so we're going to schedule some time where we've got this thing rolling. And I got these things that I'm at. I'm going to put them in. And then on top of that, man, I've still got all these other things. I've still got to get that lawn mowed. I've still got to pick those things up. I've still got to get to the dry cleaner. I've still got to get to the grocery store. I've still got to hand in my kids' form. I've still got to clean my dorm room or my roommate's going to kick me out. I still got to get all this stuff done. Right? Still got to happen. And there's still a lot of other things I want to do in life. I enjoy the Netflix binge. I enjoy the social media thing. I'm going to put it in. I enjoy just being able to veg out a little bit. I enjoy this time that I get to just sit and I enjoy all of these things that are just kind of extras, but I love them. And so I want to put those in too. Amen, brother. Listen. We're talking about time. There's an enormous spiritual principle here. When first things actually go first in our lives, everything else finds its place. An enormous part of the chaos we live in is because we picked this model. Now listen, I love you and I love me. I'm saying this to all of us equally, okay? Please hear me in this. This is everywhere. It is commonplace. It is normal. It's what you're expected to live. And it's part of what is pulling you apart at the seams. This is part of what's making it hard to keep it together. We're making calendar decisions hoping we somehow get the most important things in. Or we're letting everybody else make calendar decisions for us, hoping we can cram the important things in last. When we put first things first, Jesus invites us into it in every capacity of life because he does not care about the areas of your life. He cares about your whole life. Doesn't give a rip about a part of your life. Doesn't give a rip about your spiritual life. He cares about your whole life, including your family. And so he says, when we put first things first, when we set our mind on things above, not on earthly things, when we set our mind on things above, somehow things have a way of finding their place. Give God first what he wants first, which is our stuff, our time, our resources, and things have a way of settling. Part of the reason we feel so pulled apart is because it's just normal. It's just normal to live this way. It's normal. It's normal. This is the tension I feel right now in our season of life all the time. Who said what my kids have to be a part of? Who determined that? Am I going to determine that? Are we going to determine that together? Or is everybody else determining that for me? It is a constant question. A constant question is, who is going to occupy my time? What is going to take it? What do I have to be? Right? Because this is normal. This is default. If we are not thinking about this, we are doing this. Can I just say that again? If we're not thinking about this, we are doing this. If we're not thinking about values in first, we are doing this. This is the pattern of the world. This is the one we most naturally live. And Jesus says, man, set your mind on things above. Listen. This is such good news. How great would it be if whatever context your family's in, whatever season you're in, whatever it looks like right now, how great would it be if you looked at your calendar and you had some room to breathe? Come on, somebody. I know some of you are so tired because you're trying to balance this. You're trying to balance this. Can I give you a warning regardless of your age if you're married and don't have any kids? Can I just give you a warning? If you don't get this set now, We'll get you to a counselor when you have kids and try and figure it out. Figure it out now. Work at it right now. It's never too late and it's never too early. And this is constant for us. It's constant. How good would it feel to just have room to breathe? Because the first things went in first. This over here looks a lot like a kind of a Christian family in our culture. Just it's what's normal. This over here, this is how Jesus-centered families work, and it's why there's it doesn't mean it's perfect. It doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean there's not pressure. It doesn't mean there's not disaster. It doesn't mean there's not conflict. Right? It's huge. Because here's what happens. The calendar gets better when sacred goes first. The calendar gets better. I want you to hear something. I did not say the calendar gets perfect. You still happen to be human, and so do I. And we bring ourselves to this calendar process. It doesn't get perfect, but it sure gets better. You want to change the words a little bit? Calendar gets easier. Not easy, but it gets easier when sacred goes first. Calendar gets easier when sacred goes first. Calendar gets easier when sacred goes first. Which, by the way, so does your financing, so does your parenting, so does your marriage in general, so does your job, so does your health, right? You can play it out every time. Calendar gets easier when sacred goes first. What that means for some of us is we're literally going to have, we're going to have to just clear the calendar. We're going to have to start over. We're going to have to gradually let commitments end that we probably shouldn't have taken in the first place or that are no longer valuable to us. At one point they might have been, but maybe they are no more, right? Because we've got these rocks over here and we're like, man, I can't believe I don't have any time and energy left to serve and add value to other people's lives and give myself to things. And it's because we piled the rocks in the wrong way. And some of us are going to have to go back to back and say, okay, what do I really value? What is first? And we're putting that in first as a family. Because if it's not in here, it's not sacred. If it's not in here, it's not sacred. So here's the question. From your list of sacred that you worked on last week, what really is sacred? From the list, what are you actually going to live like it's sacred? It's one thing to have a list that's sacred and say it's sacred. But what's really going to be non-negotiable? This is where the list gets put to test a little bit. This is where we get to try it. It's one thing to form a list, even looks good on a wall. It's another thing for that list to hit your calendar. And it's just challenging. From your list of sacred, now you can go back and look at it and say, okay, now if we talk about taking that list and putting it in a calendar, is it still sacred? Are these still the things? Are these still the things that are most important to us as a dating couple or as an engaged couple or a married couple or parents or siblings or people who are parenting their parents? Now, is it still really sacred? Is that still what sacred does? And when we begin to kind of figure that out, here's what we understand is that calendar is still work, but it at least becomes workable. Calendar is still work, but it at least becomes workable. Which simply means this: when we put the right things in first, please hear me on this. Listen, what we begin to find is it becomes workable. We don't have to live as a victim to this anymore. We don't have to do that. This doesn't become easy, but becomes workable. And it actually can mitigate some conflict. Imagine just if your family could take a breath. Imagine if there was a little room in your calendar, which meant you didn't fight about what went in, what had to stay out. Because the most important things went first. The sacred things, the thing that you agreed were sacred, it went first. Your time together, your fun together, your serving together, your investing together, your trajectory together, your dream, that went first. You didn't have to fight about which rock was going to fall off the ledge here. It's still work. It just makes it workable.